Okay, well, I think we'll get started. Thank you for joining. I'm Alicia Smith, and I am the Executive Director of Dyslexia Canada. Dyslexia Canada is a national charity, and we're committed to ensuring that every child in Canada with dyslexia has a fair and equitable education. And thank you for joining our Spotlight webinar series. This is the first of our Spotlight series. The goal of this webinar series is to create a space for a national discussion about reading. Because education in Canada is a provincial issue, we sometimes don't get a chance to hear about the things that are happening outside of our home provinces or territories. And currently there are a lot of really very amazing and positive things that are happening in pockets and corners right across Canada. And so we're hoping that with this series, we can bring people together, we can share those stories of the educators, researchers, and advocates who are leading the way. And I know that there is a lot that we can learn from these stories, both from the experiences and also just in terms of having inspiration to bring back to our work in our parts of the country. So that is the goal of this series, and I'm very happy to have our two guests here tonight to kick it off. This is our very first episode. Before we did get started though, and before I introduce our speakers, I just wanted to go over a few quick housekeeping pieces. The question and answer is open. So please, if you have a question that you would like to direct to our presenters, please use the Q&A function. If you have a general comment, the chat is also open and you can use the chat for that. If there's a resource that you would like to share with others, you can put that in the chat and I will pull those links and resources out of the chat at the end and share those with everyone after the webinar. And also, finally, after the presentation is completed and the question and answer period is over, I will be selecting a winner for a copy of the Phonics Companion, which is a book that our presenter, Dr. Georgiou, and Christy Dunn have published, which is available soon. I'm seeing on Twitter now people are holding up their hard copies. They're very excited to get that. So stick around until the end and we will be drawing a winner for a prize of one of those books. Oops, sorry. And let me just end my share and introduce our speakers. So thank you both for joining us tonight. We have two speakers joining us. Dr. Georgiou is our first, and Dr. Georgiou received his PhD from the University of Alberta in 2008 with specialization in psychological studies and education. Before joining the U of A as a faculty member, Dr. Georgiou worked as a research associate at the Ministry of Education and Culture in Cyprus and as a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of, okay, I can't say this, you're gonna have to jump in and say the word, the name of the town, George.
That's Jyväskylä.
Yeah, I can't pronounce that.
In Finland.
In Finland, I'm sure that was a lovely and beautiful place. Dr. Georgiou's research focuses on two dimensions of literacy acquisition: the factors that facilitate or impede reading and spelling acquisition across languages, and the diagnosis and remediation of reading difficulties in elementary school children. In the last 2 years, he was seconded to Alberta Education to oversee the development of the new English language arts curriculum. For excellence in research and impact to the broader community, Dr. Georgiou received several awards. In 2014, he received the Martha Cook Piper Research Award from the University of Alberta. In 2015, the Richard E. Snow Award from the American Psychological Association. In 2019, the Alberta Teachers Association Educational Research Award, and in 2020, the Kilman Professorship Award. In 2018, he also became a member of the College of the Royal Society of Canada. Finally, he serves as the associate editor of the Reading and Writing Journal and the Reading League Journal, and he is a member of the editorial board of several international journals. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Georgiou. And I'll also introduce our other guest, Michael McMahon, sorry. Michael has over 25 years in the Alberta education system and grew up in rural Alberta. He has a passion for research and moving the dial on every kid in their learning. Mike is a Dare to Lead facilitator and has valued spending time with Brene Brown. Mike believes training with Brene Brown and the Dare to Lead learning has had the single biggest impact on him personally and professionally. The district has seen a major decline in requirement for student discipline, more connected staff through this training, and a huge increase in reading standard scores throughout the pandemic, which is a major accomplishment. So thank you very much, Mike, for joining us, and thank you, Dr. Georgiou, as well. I am now going to turn it over to you for the duration of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Good evening, everyone. Let me share my screen. Okay. I think that over the last 15 years, we have done a lot of research here in Alberta that allows us to have a pretty clear and comprehensive idea of what works, what doesn't work, what we need to do as Ministry of Education, what we need to do as superintendents of different school divisions, what we need to do as researchers that collaborate with different school divisions, and what we need to do as organizations like Dyslexia Canada to support the work that we have been doing over these years. So in the next couple of minutes, I will be presenting what I call a comprehensive approach to improving literacy with examples of that work, and invite you to discuss and ask questions of the process that has led us to this approach that I think that is quite powerful. And I'm saying quite powerful, not based on how kids are feeling, based on empirical evidence, based on data we have collected. And that's partly the reason why I am joined today by Superintendent Mike McMahon, whom I respect greatly for the work that he has done in his own school division. I had said, I think, in multiple occasions that I feel Mike McMahon is the best superintendent currently we have in Alberta. And you'll probably see why. Now, we know that when we are talking about tiers, and that goes back to the response to intervention theoretical models, there are about 80% of the kids that will be learning no matter what the instruction will look like, assuming they receive some kind of instruction in their class and also support from peers or parents, etc. 80% of them, or roughly 80%, will be able to read. But there are 20% of the kids who need additional support, either in small groups, tier 2, or one-on-one. And that's about 5%. So ideally, at any point in time when we assess the kids in schools, we should see that we have about 20% of the kids having some reading difficulties. So that should be kind of a goal to reach that point that about 20% of the kids are struggling. However, based on data we have, and I'm not using my own personal assessments, this is published information in different places, in different journals and avenues. We know that that number is much higher. And to be more current, in 2021, when Alberta Education asked all the school divisions in Alberta to assess their grade 1 to 3 kids and report how many of them were performing below a cutoff score, so that Alberta would provide additional funding to the school divisions to address the learning losses due to COVID, they were a little bit shocked to find out that the school divisions themselves reported that they had about 32.4, in fact, the accurate number of kids performing below grade level. So that's 12% already higher than what research says that number should be. So what I will be providing you tonight is an idea, or if you want to call it a procedure or a structure of what we have found it has worked. And it has worked to the point that some of the school divisions that have been using this approach and have been engaging their teachers in ongoing training, they currently enjoy less than 5% of struggling readers. So go from 32 across Alberta to about less than 5%. That's a big jump, and that's the direction we want to see for sure in the future. So what is I call it an Alberta-made solution, but that's not really accurate to say. This is what is given knowledge, what is accepted across the world of best practices. So what should we do with our system to see the number of struggling readers go down? You need to provide ongoing training to teachers on best practices. Unfortunately, we know from the universities that our undergraduate students graduate with one undergraduate course on language and literacy. And there is nobody really who believes that with one course in one term, that pre-service teachers will have a very good understanding of how to assess and how to intervene with struggling kids. So we need to, as researchers, to go back to schools and work collaboratively with superintendents to train the teachers on best practices. And we have had great success here in Alberta, at least with many school divisions that are interested to hear what best practices mean and what they look like in every classroom. We also need to provide norm-referenced assessments, not just criterion-referenced assessments that we ask the teachers to do on a regular basis, but we also need to know where our students stand compared to same-age peers across North America. That serves as a good indicator of how well our students are doing relative to the norms. And also it gives us an indication of how well we can progress over time and areas in which the students may need additional support. Finally, we need to provide evidence-based tier 2, tier 3 intervention. And I'm saying this because there are many instances that I have seen in our schools here in Alberta where they are not using evidence-based tier 2 interventions. We also know that early prevention is the best intervention. And when you hear early prevention, that means that we need to find out who are the kids who are struggling early on, so we can provide them with the right type of intervention. When I started this work with schools about 15 years ago, many of them had expressed interest in some standardized norm-referenced assessments. And that's when we came up with this set of 3 reading assessments that the teachers are administering because they are quick, they're reliable, they have alternate forms, and they can calculate and give to the teachers standard scores and percentile ranks that they can then use to interpret, and I will be showing you how they do it in the next couple of slides. Now, notice that when I was asked about these assessments, the principals had asked me find out what assessments would work for our type of schools and the fact that we want them to be quick and not take a long time to administer, etc. So I was given these 4 criteria from the principals to work with and go through a lot of assessments that are published through different publishers and just make some recommendations. And I have to say that when we started this work, we had many more assessments but we realized that we were getting more information that was absolutely needed to do the work. So we cut it down to the 4 tasks that I referred to earlier. So the assessments had to be quick. They should be administered by teachers, not by psychologists or my graduate students. They should have alternate forms, A, B, C, and D, etc., so that teachers could use them at different points in time. And most importantly, they should assess the 5 pillars of literacy, because the principals and superintendents wanted to know how our students are doing in the different areas of instruction that we should be providing. Now, once they collect the data, we have a process in which the teachers working collaboratively with their same grade level colleagues, they discuss the data of their students. The principals also come together and discuss the data of their schools. And if you have multiple school divisions, and we haven't achieved that yet, we could potentially have multiple superintendents presenting their own data and discussing their progress over time. So there are 4 ways in which you can interpret the data or look at the data at the school level, at the grade level, class level, and student level. Of course, the most important one is the student level. It's the one that we ask the teachers to pay attention to, because if the student level scores are not improving over time, then of course the class levels or grade levels will not be improving either. So how do we interpret the data at the school level? As you can see here, in that measure, the TOSREF, you had school A, school B. Obviously, the difference that you can see right away is from the grade 2 and 3 kids. In school A, they are about 10 standard points lower than school B. And if the schools are located side by side or in the next neighborhood, then clearly it's not a matter of differences in socioeconomic status or differences in other demographic information. It has to do more with what the schools are doing and the practices that they use in their own schools. You can look at it at the grade level. If you have multiple classes within the same grade, you can average the standard scores of the students. You can see here that we had Form A and Form B, and in May, they also assess their students in Form C. You can calculate the change over time, and because these are standard scores, any change is not due to the kids getting older, it's due to instruction, and therefore the message the teachers get right away is that their work has a measurable impact on their students' performance. Clearly here, you can see that grades 4, 5, and 6, they started with standard scores below 100, which is the average, and the target if you have a normally performing class or grade. And by January, they reached that level. Obviously, there is more work to be done for the earlier grades. Can look at also class data. If you are a principal and you have multiple classes, let's pretend they administered the TOSREC in October. You calculate the average across classes and you see that everybody starts about the same level. Then you reassess them in January. You can see that everybody now is in green, which means that they are performing within average and grade expected levels. But you can also calculate the difference between October and January, and a difference of about 7 standard points means that the kids are growing by 1.5 years within that time period. When they assess them in May, you can see that all of the classes have been performing above grade level. They have all been improving, but class number 2 has been improving much more than any other class. So if for principals, that would mean that perhaps we can ask that teacher to share what she's doing in her whole class with the other teachers now, either within the same grade level or across grades. Most importantly, you should be looking at the student profile. When you put the scores side by side, we use this color coding to help the teachers, because when we started this work at the beginning, there were not many teachers who knew what standard scores mean and what percentile ranks mean, etc. So we had to color code the kids. Anybody scoring below 85 was color coded in red. Anybody between 86 and 100 was color coded as orange to indicate that there is room for growth, and anybody above 100 with the green color. So if you look at student number 1, you clearly see that there is a problem in TOSREC, and we know that TOSREC is measuring reading efficiency and comprehension. So I will be working or putting more emphasis on reading efficiency and comprehension activities with that student. In contrast, student number 2 shows to have reading difficulties across all areas, with the lowest score being in TAURE, in this case, the phonemic decoding efficiency test that is measuring phonics, and we do more work with that child in that area. Because of the success of the work we have done over the last couple of years across multiple school divisions, Alberta, when I was seconded and I was working on the new English language arts curriculum, they asked me and colleagues to offer our expertise and provide to schools some reading assessments that would be quick to administer and that the province could deploy and the teachers could use for free across the province. So we got permissions. We used the CASLs and COFCAR. I see that there is an L missing from CASLs, which is similar to the diagnostic test of work reading processes that is used in the UK. It has 3 conditions: regular words, exception words, and non-words. And by administering these 3 conditions to the students, the teachers get immediate information about whether their kids are doing well in non-word, indicating that they have good phonic skills, and exception word, meaning that they have good irregular word reading and print exposure. Now, as of September 2022, all the grade 1 to 3 students in Alberta, they are screened. Alberta Education mandated screening of all the kids in grades 1 to 3. Twice a year at the beginning and at the end of the school year. So whatever has been recommended with the Ontario Human Rights Commission report and was to the right direction, and I applaud the work that has been done and put into that report by my colleagues, you see that we have already addressed that need for early screening in Alberta. Now, if we were to, I mentioned earlier that we should be also using evidence-based tier 2, tier 3 interventions. It happened that in 2015, in collaboration with Dr. Robert Savage, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Education at York University, we received a federal grant to implement tier 2 intervention to students in Quebec and in Alberta. We started with about 290 grade 1 kids. By the end of grade 3, we were left with 3 kids who were struggling to read. And that's partly, you might be wondering, this is way lower than the 5% of the kids who are typically having dyslexia in the whole population. The answer is that we have been successful because teachers knew how to teach in their regular class, and because we had good interventions in place that were provided intensively for 3 years. In the last year, we also received a grant from Alberta Education to provide full-out small group intervention to grade 2 and grade 3 kids in Alberta who were struggling to read. We engaged 4 school divisions. Fort Vermilion School Division, that Mike is the superintendent, was one of them. 83 classes, 362 kids who were screened to be at risk or experiencing reading difficulties. And after 4.5 months, so from the beginning of October to early February, 80% of them improved by 1.5 years using standardized measures, norm-referenced assessment, and 70% of them no longer needed additional intervention at that time. We also measured their and delayed post-tests, which was in May. We are currently analyzing the data, so I don't really know and I can't tell about how many kids maintain their gains. Because of the success of the screening phase and the work we have been doing with the intervention that I mentioned to you earlier, Alberta Education, they realized the need to rely on data to make decisions, which I very much applaud, and they ask us to provide them with some lessons that they could package and provide to all the schools, again, for free, so that they would address the learning losses due to COVID. So we did provide them with these reading intervention lessons. As you can, I took a screenshot of this. You can see it's 589 pages. And I know that several school divisions outside of Alberta, they have inquired about this. They asked Alberta Education for permission to use this, and Alberta Education was okay with sharing these resources with them. So what we have learned in this process, I personally learned that Rome was not built in one day, and I had multiple discussions with Mike over these last 15 years, and sometimes where I express my dissatisfaction or disappointment with how slow the process is with some school divisions or across the province, when you know that some things have been working and you have the evidence to prove it, but change is not coming very quickly. I also learned that it is a joint effort. I personally made an effort to reach out to every school division, and particularly the ones that they were participating in our research, to help the teachers to establish a partnership with the schools. We have a mutual partnership that they are supporting our research, but we also go back to the schools and we support the work that is done in the schools. I also learned that there is no silver bullet. Most of the school divisions, unfortunately, they ask me, give me your program, and they think that by opening up the book and reading through the pages to their kids, they can impact or change the reading performance of their kids. That's, I think, a utopia to believe that you can do that by just reading through the pages, unless you train the teachers on best practices and they understand how to provide these best practices to their students and have data to use to support your decisions, then change is not happening. You also need to have a long-term plan and to develop a structure of supporting your teachers. I hear quite often that we want to see a 20% reduction in our struggling readers in a year time. Well, if you have been having reading difficulties for 20 years and the numbers have been rising, the chances that you will see a huge decline in a year are very small. So we typically have a 3-year plan with school divisions here in Alberta that I work with. They see a huge growth at the very beginning when the teachers actually start doing something with their students in their class. And there is a gradual improvement in their performance until we get to the lower than 20%, and in many cases lower than 5%. I also learned that you're allowed to make mistakes. We made many mistakes in the past when we were trying to sort this process out. We learned from our mistakes, and now we have a process in place that is working, and it is working across different school divisions irrespective of where they are located. So I'll stop here, and I don't know if we were taking any questions at this point, or if Mike will be presenting.
Sure, I might as well direct some questions at you now, and then people can continue to put questions in the chat, and then we'll ask Mike some questions at the end as well. So we do have a few questions. The first one is about norm referenced scores that you were talking about. And the question is, with respect to norm referenced assessments, if we use how students are doing across North America as the norm, what happens if many regions are doing so poorly that they skew the norm downwards? Example, because of the use of non-evidence-based teaching practices, such as through queuing, which is common. But if all regions were teaching to best practices, then that norm would be higher. So what are your thoughts about using norm referenced?
Yes, that is a fair criticism. But when you don't have locally normed assessments, norm reference assessments, you have to start from somewhere. And I can tell you confidently that after testing more than 20,000 kids across Alberta, this is the take-home message. In grade 1 and grade 1 and 2, the scores are about 2 standard points lower than the American norms. Okay, 2 standard points. And the reason for that is that typically the kids in the States, kindergarten is mandatory. They also do more phonological awareness, more phonics work in kindergarten before the kids go to grade 1. So their grade 1 scores are a little bit higher than our scores. But by grade 3, we know that our scores here, at least in Alberta, they are about the same as the American norms. So there are no difference. So I'm quite confident that we are not underestimating or overestimating our students' performance. And what we are mostly interested is not necessarily the starting point. It's the growth over time. So you may start with 2 standard points lower than the American norms, but if you are showing growth over time, that's what we want to see in the schools, in every school.
Excellent. I'm just going to ask one.
I should also add that Alberta Education is currently developing norms for the assessments that we have deployed. And so we will also be having locally developed norms in the schools as of next August.
That's fantastic.
And just a highlight from us too, I know I haven't talked yet, but we went with this for like 5 years and now have built our own norms around that. And we've actually have our cut score now at 90, which is 5 points higher or a full year of growth higher on a standard score than was where you originally started at 85. So over time, you build your own context. And as you improve, you move the norm to, to achieve more or higher where you believe you should be. So right now our cut score in terms of tier 1 sports is 90 and higher, where when you first started it was 85. So as you move, as you're pulling that data in and comparing it over time, norms don't just fall out of the sky. Some people think they do, but they don't, and they take a little bit of work to get there. And we collected 4 years of data before we went down that path to get there. So I would suggest start somewhere and then you have a path to build your own.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. And that, you determine what the cut score is going to be based on your interpretation of that data and what you think the students need. So that makes sense as well, for sure. I'm just going to ask one more question from the questions, and then we'll turn it over to Mike, because I think a couple of the other questions that are in here are going to relate really to what Mike is going to be talking about. But just a quick question was that you had mentioned the resources that you developed for the Ministry of Alberta, and somebody was asking, you had said that some school districts have requested access to those resources and Alberta had been fine with it. Is there a website or a place where people can go and request that access, or?
No, you just need to reach out to Alberta Education. When you go to New Learn Alberta or the Alberta Education website, there's a contact information there, so you can reach out to the person that is in the contact or you can send me an email and I can direct you to the right person, and you can request this information from them.
That's fantastic. Thank you. So why don't we turn it over to Mike, and then we'll ask some more questions at the end. But please keep your questions coming in the chat, and we will get to as many as we can. Thanks.
In a perfect world, you should see that now, hopefully. So I'll just explain our story from our journey for structured literacy supports. And I think George and I met about 5 or 6 years ago, and we've kind of been on this journey together. And I'll tell you where we come from. We came from a place where balanced literacy was king, and F and P was our queen. And that's and we had a measure of CAT, and we were using CAT as a measure. And when I took over the seat as superintendent, I felt it wasn't giving us what we needed in order to move forward. And that was a big piece for me. And I'll tell you a little bit who we are, and I'll get to that in a minute. But so we're in the northwest corner of the province. We're about the size of New Brunswick in terms of land mass. The couple of schools that I'll share with you are either 100% ESL or about 50% First Nations, Métis, and Inuit in different communities. But in both of those cases, we have very unique cultures, and definitely some issues around dyslexia and some learning disabilities. And so interventions were a huge help in terms of moving that forward. We do run in what's called an assurance model, which we are accountable directly to parents. And starting this month, at the end of November, our data that we pull in from our assessments, the 3 Ts in reading, of course, and our RAT5 in math, will be live data on the website in which parents can interact with. Digitally, they can search from divisions to boys and girls to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit to non-First Nations and Métis and Inuit. But it'll be probably the first jurisdiction in Alberta that has live data that flows after each assessment. We assess kids 3 times a year, but we knew that Cat5 was not a measure that impacted our pedagogy, and we needed something that was going to change that. And so when I met George, I said, what's going to do that? And then we started talking about the 3 Ts, is what we call them. And from my chair, I always say that your job is very simple. Just move the dial on every kid. And so as George was showing those screens, we analyze all our data now in Power BI, which is a Microsoft Office product. And beside every child, you will either see a red arrow or a green arrow in all 3 assessments to say whether they went up or they went down. But in order to start that, we needed to have all of our teachers and our leadership have a foundational knowledge of the science of reading. We know systematically how to teach reading. So if we know systematically how to teach reading, and we know systematically through our norm-referenced measures what can identify which pillar is struggling, then we can put interventions in place that are measurable, specific. And the biggest key to all of that, there's 2 huge issues. One, the system becomes extremely accountable. And when you put accountability in a system to that degree, it adds a little bit of stress to the system. There's no doubt about it. But you also, from an intervention perspective, at least from a superintendent's chair, is we need to minimize autonomy around intervention. So what we were doing in the past, we'd pick up an intervention and we would try it, even though it was never designed for it to be tried in that specific incidences. So a prime example of that, where what we do now is we specifically go to the intervention, do it with fidelity, actually get training around the intervention with both the teacher and the interventionist. And one of the products that we use for decoding is called Empower Reading. It's a fantastic piece that will help with dyslexia. It helps with a number of other decoding issues. And it allows us then to move a child step by step to remediate those issues around PA and P. But if the intervention itself too is not measurable, then how do you know you've picked the right intervention? So we're multiple measurement people. We measure through 3 T's 3 times a year. So we do that in September, we do that in January, and then we do that in May again, so that we're in the beginning. How did we move? How did we move to the end? How do we program for them to come back in the fall? If they need an intervention, is the said intervention working in between there? Now, Empowers 120 lessons of a very, very systematic scripted intervention around decoding. What we have found with children that struggle with reading is that we are way better off to start off with the stuff that George has produced and the JP DAS Center in grade 1 and grade 2, and we actually don't start Empower to grade 3. And the combination between those two is huge in terms of kids reading. I tell this to everybody, parents and everybody. As educators, we are either teaching kids how to read or we're teaching them to be criminals. That's our option, because there's a direct correlation with kids that can't read and their interaction with the justice system. And from a leadership perspective, the people that need to push reading change in the organization are anyone that's in a leadership position. And I would argue, if you're a teacher, if you're an inclusive ed coordinator, if you're a vice principal, if you're a principal, or if you're a superintendent, you have to get into the research and explain why this structure of reading and literacy supports is vital to ensure that all students are successful and you move the dial on every kid. In Alberta, we have 2 things called the Leadership Quality Standard and Superintendent Leadership Quality Standard. And these are the 7 pillars that embody that. And the leadership piece really leads to, before we would do a measure holistically, and it doesn't really tell you anything. Our CAT data was okay, but it didn't tell us anything. It didn't tell us how to fix reading. It didn't tell us how to fix math. So we wanted something that, one, the teacher applied, the TOSREC, for example. Pedagogically, they can change tomorrow. They instantly only enter a standard score in our system. Once the standard score is entered, it automatically tiers our kids from tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. And based on that, then you automatically know when did interventions happen in tier 2, what interventions happen in tier 3, what interventions happen in tier 4, specifically for each of the 5 pillars in reading. And when you have a system designed like that, it takes the guesswork out of it. And the success out of it. In both schools, one in our Mennonite community and one in our First Nations community, we saw 18 standardized score points in grade 1. 18 standardized score points. So if 5 score points is a 1 year of growth, we're over 3 years of growth in one of our grade 1 classes last year. And in the other school, there's 15 standardized score points. So again, 3 years of growth in grade 1. They may not come in with limited English and not knowing how letter sounds and blended sounds and all that works, but by the end of it, we're producing kids that move into grade 2, over 80% of them that can be successful readers, where before we were just guessing at it. And then you get into year 3, year 4, grade 5, grade 6, and to fix that problem is next to impossible. And the farther you go, the worse, of course, and the harder it is. Implementation, I'll be short so we can get into questions for sure. A structure like this is not for the faint of heart. Implementation is tough, it's hard. And in education, I find that we often drink Kool-Aid for a long period of time. We drank F&P Kool-Aid for 12 years. And you know what? All the research, and there's a number of research article out there, it's right 30% of the time. 30% of the time isn't good enough for this superintendent. It should be good enough for anybody. The Ontario Human Rights Commission has also sort of put it out there that this isn't a product that should be used to teach reading. So when you know better, you have to do better. But saying, you know what, we're not very good at this. How do we get better? But systematic and explicit reading interventions are vital in terms of, the 5 pillars. If you measure each of the 5 pillars, how do you move forward with that? I talked about the average movement in grade 1, and right now I think the biggest piece that we're missing in a jurisdiction is around oral language. what are we doing in oral language in kindergarten and grade 1 to ensure that our kids are not left behind? We typically don't do the 3 T's until January of grade 1. So we do use CTOP, which allows us to identify some decoding in those. And we are using the early math assessment and the PENS, of course. And then we do now have an oral language screener before they come in. So every kid that comes into ECS or early childhood studies gets CTOP before they come in. So we have a starting point to move forward. Again, I'll put into Power BI so that we can program and move the dial on every kid. But like I said, it's not for the faint of heart. It's for people that are passionate about reading and changing the trajectory of kids. I'll tell you a personal story. Going through school, if I've actually did the 3T testing, I probably test out, believe it or not, at a grade 5 or grade 6 level. I don't read, and I'm a superintendent. I almost have a PhD. Every good writer has an editor. That's what I always tell people. But I went through school not knowing how to read. And audiobooks have kind of changed my life in terms of that. A good audiobook for me is one that is about 6 hours long. That's how long it takes me to drive from my home to an international airport. So if I can get 6 hour long books, I can get 2 done in a trip. We're northern Alberta, but that is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about reading, because I feel lucky that I was given opportunities and skills and devices to help me cope, but I really never really learned how to read. And I do have decoding issues and fluency issues, which is quite interesting. And I will do everything in my power as a superintendent for that not to happen to the 3,500 kids that are in our jurisdiction, because I think it's life-changing. I'm one of the lucky ones because I have a career and I've done all of it, but I know many people that haven't, and they've been in jail and incarcerated and those sort of pieces. So I'll stop there and we can get to more questions.
Thank you so much for sharing that and sharing that personal perspective as well. That is really, it's really great to hear that and to bring it back to the why you're trying to do this and why you're so passionate about it. I share your passion in that regard. I am dyslexic myself, so I had struggles with early reading for sure. They run in my family, so this is where my personal passion for this comes from for sure. So thank you for mentioning that and speaking to that. And we do have some questions. I will get to the questions. Okay, so the first question I want to throw out to both of you is about planning for teachers and the change for teachers. So the question is, did you have a strategic plan to deal with teachers who refused to change or leave balanced literacy? How did you handle that?
Yeah, from our perspective, what we have changed is what a day looks like from an administrator's perspective and from a leadership perspective. What we consider the non-negotiable. George talks to them about effective professional development, about best practices. So the non-negotiables for us in reading is, where is your PA? Where is, especially grade 1, let's say, where's your PA? Where's your P? And then when you move up to higher levels, where's your morphology? Where's all of those best practices that teach that? And we say, here's what your day kind of looks like. So there's this big myth about autonomy that once you've passed an evaluation, then you're good to go and you're great to go for life. And I look at autonomy as something that's earned. There's many teachers that have earned their autonomy, but it's the same as, your daughter or your son just got their license at 16. Would you give them the key to the Corvette, or you give them the key to the Kia? Like they don't have the autonomy to drive the Corvette. Why would you do that? So if you've earned it, then fill your boots, go do that. But in our first, second year, and even teachers that are not getting results based on that, then if we're not getting those results, then you don't have autonomy. And so that gets taken away. And here's the expectation when we come into your classroom, and this is what we want to see. On the math side, a non-negotiable is the CRA method of instruction. Is it concrete? Can they represent it? And those pieces around fantastic best practices. And if you don't do that PD, I believe first with leadership, so leadership knows the look fors, but we call them non-negotiables. A resource is always negotiable. Here's where a resource isn't negotiable. When it's an intervention. When Empower is specifically designed to fix decoding, don't use for fluency. It won't work. You already know that. It says in the manual, don't do it. And I think that's where we get into trouble with F&P is right now F&P is being used for something it was never designed to be used for. But it feels good. And reading's not about a feeling. Reading is structured, measurable, and attainable for every child, I believe, or 95% of them.
Did you want to add anything to that, George? Is there?
Well, I think Mike has covered most of what I was going to say, but every change is difficult, and we didn't achieve every single teacher in the province to be on board in one day or even in a year. Like we have in many schools I have been working with, they have been sending their teachers year after year to receive the same training. Every single year they learn something new, and they are changing their own journey into literacy. Some of them haven't heard anybody talking about best practices in their whole life. They only had one course at the university that taught them nothing, and that was the first time they would be hearing anything about phonological awareness or phonics or morphology. And so it takes time, and it takes also the fact that we are using norm-referenced assessments is very important, because if you're a balanced literacy teacher and you're doing a fantastic job, then prove it. Show me with the data that you have generated that the kids are improving in your reading. And if they are improving, perfectly fine, keep using what you are doing. But for most of the time that we have seen in the school, they are not, particularly the kids that are struggling to read. So they need more systematic and explicit instruction that is not provided.
Thanks. And there's another question that kind of, I'm not going in order anymore, but this one kind of follows onto that around the incorporation of phonological awareness and phonics in grade 1 and 2. So the question is, when you incorporated more of that, how did that change the rest of the ELA program or the balanced literacy program? So what did you replace guided reading with and those F&P resources? And are you still using the F&P resources at all, or have they been entirely replaced?
Now, the new curriculum is, as we know that, and there is multiple pieces of evidence, published studies, they have clearly shown that there is a core of foundational skills that you have to teach to the kids. Mike used the term non-negotiable. So I'm not saying we should never be thinking that phonics or PA is the only things we should be teaching to kids. Like if you start doing this and you're emphasizing phonics over anything else, then you'll start seeing that your kids are not performing well in reading comprehension or in reading fluency. You need to have a multi-componential approach to literacy. And that's what the new English language arts curriculum that we have put together is doing. It has the PA, but it also has the phonics, it also has the reading fluency, it has comprehension, it has oral language skills, it has listening skills, it has many other features, and you have to teach all of this. You can't, I don't recommend to schools ever that they have to teach just phonological awareness or only phonics. And you need to look at, if you're a teacher, how do you structure your 40 minutes of LA time to cover, depending on what grade you are teaching. In every grade, as Mike said, the non-negotiables, you have to spend some time on PA, phonics, sight word reading, vocabulary, comprehension. As you're moving into upper elementary grades, then the focus shifts to more of oral language, morphology, comprehension activities. And I don't like to refer to specific programs. I'm not a big fan of packaged programs that you are reading through the pages. The reason being is that package programs are typically developed having an average student in mind. And I don't know a class that only has average students. It has a plethora of profiles. So unless you understand the level of your students and what they know or what they don't know, in order to provide tailor-made instruction, then using what I say cookbook will not really improve your students' performance. Now, I may be recommending cookbooks once in a while to teachers that have minimal experience teaching and they don't know where to start. So it's better to start from something that will help you get started, and slowly, hopefully you'll get better than doing nothing.
Yeah, and I would say there, Alicia, there is only one factor in a classroom that matters most than all other, and that's the human being in that room. And if they're passionate about moving the dial on every kid, they're strategically planning around that child and where they're at and where to move them to the next level. There's not a program in the world that is useful if the teacher in that room isn't doing best practices. There's every research out there would tell you that it is the human being that's getting paid at that in that classroom that is the most vital component of kids learning. No program is going to fix anything. If it was, George wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't be sitting here. There'd be this silver bullet to reading. Read this book and you're off. You can just put your feet up and just make it happen. But it's not that simplistic. And I think that's the biggest piece from perspective. Somebody says, what do you look for when you hire a teacher? I look for a teacher that can solve wicked problems, because I'm actually paying for your brain. I'm paying for the power for you to look at a child doing assessments and going, this is what this kid's need to fix this problem. No book, no resource is going to do that. That's why I got into teaching. I think that's why majority of people got into teaching.
Yeah, I think that's so true, that the teacher knowledge is really the most important factor here, and moving the dial on that. And we did have a question as well that sort of related back to teacher knowledge, and it was about faculties of education and what's happening. So can you speak to really, have there been or are there changes happening in terms of initial teacher training in the Alberta faculties of education now that you have this new curriculum developed?
I would say that there is, George can probably speak at the BEd level. I would say this year was the first year that we've moved the dial but it is at a master's degree level, in which we went to the university and said, this is the master's course, this is the master's degree you're going to deliver for us in literacy and numeracy. And this is what we want, and we'll pay you to do it. But if you're not doing that, we're going to find somebody that will do it for us. And it's the first time that I think you're starting to see that influence. In bachelor's of educations, there, we talk with kids all the time, and I think the change there is much, much slower. In fact, we just had a group of 30 kids from a university up visiting our area in our schools for 2 days. And one of the questions, I meet with them and have a supper with them at the end, and one of the kids put up their hands and said, we noticed that there's no F&P in your schools. What do you use? And I said, you don't got enough time for me to go on about what we do. But anyway, it was a good question. So they're still being taught at post-secondary on queuing systems and those sort of systems, which we know the Ontario Human Rights Commission, and we know from research that they just don't meet the needs of kids. George can probably maybe speak a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that there has been some movement, particularly after the Ontario Human Rights Commission report, and that comes from the Ministry of Education asking for the faculties of education of what exactly they are doing, and also from the faculties of education themselves, that they realize that they need to offer more courses. But a change is slow. We can't change everything in a year. So I have been in Alberta for 20 years. I haven't seen any movement into mandatory early screening for 20 years, and it just happened this year. And I haven't seen any Ministry of Education sharing resources with the schools and interventions and asking them to implement them and report back to Alberta Education the scores of the kids before and after the intervention. So it took 20 years, I have seen it. So hopefully the next 20 years, I will also see more courses at the undergraduate level for pre-service teachers.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you for keeping it up. And I hope it doesn't take you 20 more years to get those courses into the undergraduate level. I did notice that the University of Alberta now has a graduate certificate program that's opening up. That's really interesting. Is that the program you were talking about, Mike, that you requested? Or is it a different program?
Yeah, so the certificate program George has been a part of for a long time, and we kind of wanted to blend that because in our assurance, what parents really want for us is to be connect communities. That's our first goal, and the second is literacy and numeracy. And so we wanted to pair what we were doing out of George's research in terms of reading and say, what are we doing with math? And so we currently have a project with Carleton University out of Carleton out of Quebec, I think. No, Concordia out of Quebec, Carleton out of Ontario, and partnering with the researchers there to do the same in math of what we have accomplished in literacy. We're just 4 or 5 years behind literacy in that piece. So trying to build the same sort of, like I said, talk about the CRM model of teaching and the non-negotiables to do the same thing for kids in numeracy have we done in literacy.
That's great. And I love that you as a superintendent are having those conversations with universities and saying, hey, like, you know, we really are the end consumer of your students. And we want to see them equipped with these skills. If like, can you imagine if every superintendent had those conversations and said, you know, we're going to hire the students out of the school that is doing the training, you know, that's what we're looking for. And that's what we want to see. If any other superintendents are watching, please start having those conversations too.
Yeah, call me.
Yeah, I'm just scrolling through. There are actually quite a lot of questions here. There's a couple technical questions, and maybe I'll just throw out one of those quickly. And it's a question about screening tools. So the one that you're using that you've mentioned, that was great. Someone's asking about Acadians and Dibbles. And if those are, she said, those are often recommended. The person said, I don't think these are norm referenced. Could you explain the difference between these and the screeners that you're using?
Yeah, when Dibbles or Acadians, they're not norm referenced assessments, they're criteria or benchmark assessments. So they give you a score, and if you're performing below that score, then you are at risk or not at risk. But the difference with the norm referenced assessments is that you get standard scores and percentile ranks, and you can, any change in the scores over time is the result of instruction. So typically, if you want to go into progress monitoring and check the progress of kids, norm reference assessments are ideal, as opposed to not norm referenced assessments like Dibbles and Acadians. Now, I know that these two are free, and sometimes when you don't have money and you want to download something as a teacher and use it in your class to quickly check how your kids are doing and if they mastered the skill that you're trying to teach them, that may be easy to use and accessible.
I laugh, Alicia, because when we first started this, I said to George, I want something with a coefficient index and validity and reliability of 0.9. And he kind of chuckled with me. Well, you've limited your selection, he said, because there's not many that are above 0.9, but I wanted to go for gold.
That's great. And this wasn't a question, but it's something that I just want to throw out there as well. And in terms of the measurable growth, and, you know, with the norm referenced screeners that you're using, you mentioned a couple of times that, you know, any change in the score is really due to actual improvement in the child, not just growth, right? So could you just compare that a little bit to the sort of assessments that are built into the FNP program, like those benchmarks, the BAS or the DRA? Because as a person who I speak with parents a lot, I do a lot of talking with parents, you know, and the scores that they're often being provided would be a reading level, like they're at level 1 or they're at A, and the child is improving. They've gone up 2 levels, so they feel like things are moving along. Like that's the messaging that they're getting. So could you just sort of speak to how that would compare to the sort of or why that is perhaps misleading with those reading levels?
I'll just say one thing and then George can pipe in. Like anytime you buy an assessment, criterion reference assessment, and they are unwilling to give you the formula on how said level is being calculated, to me, it's fictitious. It means it's not real. Because if they were open and clear on how that was, you would actually know what a letter A is. And I think the difference is, one, when you go to norm reference, it is 100% real in that snapshot in time, where the other one, because you can go from a letter, you can go for level A to level B, but it's not actually accurate. And the research would tell you that 30% of the time, the kid is reading at the right level that they should be based on that assessment. So that means 7 out of 10 times it's wrong. And so if you're okay with a 30% success rate, because you're saying 30% of the time it's right, jeepers, how are you? So because for a long time we were using Star Reader as well with Accelerated Reader, again, would not give up their secrets behind the page. And if they're not going to give up, where if you look at a manual on a norm reference, you can see exactly how the score is calculated. You can put that into a spreadsheet. You can get teachers to enter standard score and automatically do all the conversions in the whole bit. They're not hiding anything. Where the other ones, in terms of a company, I believe are not open and transparent, and therefore I'm always a little bit more skeptical from a superintendent's chair. But George can definitely probably talk to you a little bit about more of the mechanics that around the accuracy.
Yeah, I think the critical point here when you're choosing assessments is how can you increase your chances to improve your students' performance by giving them an intervention that is targeting the areas that they are struggling. So if you are using this kind of like CTOP, for example, you know that it is assessing phonological awareness, rapid naming, short-term memory. If you are struggling in each one of these areas, then you get a phonological awareness or a short-term memory or a rapid naming intervention program. And the same with some of the other assessments, like non-word reading in Taure, that is giving you a very good indicator whether the kids are struggling in phonics or not. So if you're profiling the kids and you have the option of using a better assessment or an assessment that can do this job well and provide you with the information that you need to be successful as an interventionist, then why not doing it? So that's my personal opinion about norm reference versus not norm reference or criterion reference assessments. And even with the 3 T's, as I said at the beginning, this is a set of tasks that the principals, when I met with them 15 years ago, they felt very comfortable with that. We started with 7 assessments and ended up with these 3 package programs. I'm not saying they are the only ones, that they are the best of the best, but I'm saying they're good enough to do the job that we want them to do so that we can identify the needs of the kids and provide them with targeted intervention.
So Alicia, just to go back a little bit to the guided reading question too as well. So what do you do for guided reading? Our guided reading, we still do guided reading, but it's based on skills, not a fake reading level. And so it's based in a pillar based on skills. And so you might have 3, 4, 5 kids, probably max, that are working on a blended letter sound as opposed to a reading level that is not accurate. And so when you do your guided reading based on skills, you see astronomical improvement on blended letter sounds, decoding, fluency, and phonics. It's a game changer, but we were using it for leveled reading that wasn't accurate. And now we use it for skills.
Sure. I think a lot of the time too, when people think of guided reading, they think specifically of the strategies in, the big guided reading book, which, is very much about using that time period with small group reading with the kids, but to be encouraging them to use the 3 cueing. So what you're saying is you're still doing that time period with the kids where the teacher's with a small group. It's just the teacher's working on skills with them while they're reading rather than working on cueing. Is that right?
Yeah, the structure works. The cueing doesn't. So the structure is, we still use that structure. It's fantastic to build small. No, I would never say that small group instruction isn't great, but so a small group cueing isn't. We don't get results from that. We didn't.
Another question was about some research and literature suggestions or recommendations. So someone was curious about what research and literature did the school boards or ministry draw upon for the implementation process specifically. So anything that is that translational research or implementation research that you could recommend people take a look at.
Well, the school authorities in Alberta have autonomy, and Mike can correct me on this. So for many years, Alberta Education was hesitant to even recommend any resource to the school divisions, or they have been avoiding doing this because the school divisions have autonomy. So there is a fine line right now that we are trying to help the school divisions that have been using less effective practices, but at the same time, allowing school divisions like Fort Vermilion School Division that have been using evidence-based practices for several years to continue using them without imposing anything on these school divisions, as long as they have data to show that they are moving to the right direction. Needless to say, when Alberta Education actually asks school divisions to report on the assessments that they are using, that's at the beginning of COVID, about 12% reported not using any assessments. So if you could even conceptualize this, that there are school divisions that they don't have any assessments in place. And that forced Alberta Education to actually think that we need to provide something for this 12% that they don't have anything. But they also allow Mike, because they know that he's using Normreferenced, which is the gold standard of assessment, to keep using his assessments. They haven't asked him to change into the Castles and Coldcard or the lens that Alberta Education has released and shared with the schools.
One of the places where we started, Alicia, when we first started with George, and George put us onto this, is the Florida Center of Reading Research. And there's a wealth of knowledge there in terms of reading around the science of reading and where to go with it. Even when you have, there's a shift and a different wind change when even people that have been in the game a long time, Lucy Calkins is a prime example of that, who said, you know what, I've got it wrong and I'm going to fix it. And she's slowly changing everything she's doing to align with science of reading. She's not quite there yet, but when a researcher like that says, you know what, I'm not right, and this research makes sense, and this is the direction we got to go, I need to change. But then you look at other resources that are saying aren't changing at all. That also gives me a signal of saying, then obviously there's something not right there. Because when we know better for kids, we do better. It's that simple.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. There's another question, just to sort of follow up on this idea about sort of system change. And this is a good question. I'm going to read the whole thing. Research for sustainable change in instructional approaches in reading stresses a system level approach to reading improvement that looks to organizational conditions rather than micro level individualistic approaches focused solely on teachers and their knowledge. So the question is a system-based approach, so leaders at all levels, in place in your school board and in the province now?
In our school board, I would say, in the province, I would say they're not there yet. I would say it's the only way to go. So let me explain the assurance model just a little bit. So we go to parents, our stakeholders, and say to them, what are 3 of the most important things that you want your child in our system to be able to do? And they told us that we want you to be connected to a culture community. There's 15 different schools and they all have a different sort of nuance to them. And they want us to be connected to that. We want our kids to be able to read and write at the level. And we want kids to fully understand foundational numeracy skills. Once we have that, then it's up to the board of trustees to adopt that. And then it's up to the superintendent to say, here's our measures on how we're going to measure the system and be open and transparent to parents as much as we can. Then we break it down to principals who need to go, what do I need to know in order to accomplish this? What professional development happens between the system and principals? And then what professional development happens between the principals and the teachers? And then what professional development happens between the teachers and the educational assistants, or what we term to call them in our jurisdiction, interventionists. And it's interesting when you break it down, we have evolved to a point where teachers were doing all the assessment. Now the majority of the screeners in terms of assessment, because the majority of educational assistants are doing the interventions rather than some of them being that when we first started Empower, it needed to be a teacher. But now we have interventionists, which is an educational assistant that's doing that. And the reason why it works out sometimes better is because they don't play with it. It's scripted, it's structured, and they just do it. And sometimes when we know just a little bit and think we can do a little bit better, and then we change the intervention, you take away the fidelity and the validity of it, then we don't accomplish anything. And so that PD has happened over 5 years. We've used George's master students over and over. We fly them up and take them on scooter rides and take them out. We don't take George out, but we take his master's people out, and they have helped do PD for us immensely around assessments, screening, PD, interventions. And it's okay. It's just to me, it's so small in terms of money from a system level. We're very system organized and not necessarily site based. And so I 100% agree. System level thinking and an actual structure, what works, that's what moves the system.
That was a great answer. And I just want to know why George doesn't go skidooing when he comes to visit you. It sounds like lots of fun.
Hey, that's my complaint all the time. I get always pictures of my students, and they send them to me, and they have fun skidooing there. And I tell Mike, how come every time I come over there, you pick me up, and then I go directly to lecture, and then in the next plane to come back.
Oh, that's funny. Maybe I'll just ask one more question and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you. And maybe if you just end with teacher resources. So we've had a few questions about recommended resources or reading for teachers. And I know there's tons and tons of stuff available, and you both have mentioned a few this evening. But if you wanted to just end by maybe recommending one or two resources that you think that teachers should run out and visit if they want to learn more.
Yeah, he's not even paying me to say this, but if you get your hands on Reading Companion, it's fantastic in terms of foundation to get started with. It really puts the phonics and the phonemic awareness back in balanced literacy or whatever you're programming, so that you fully understand what a child needs before they can actually get there. Where sometimes we focus so much on comprehension, but if we actually fix the code, and comprehension would come more as a byproduct as anything else. And the Phonics Companion, it's easy read, it's easily implemented. So spend the $90 and it's the best $90 you'll spend in understanding a deeper understanding. If you want a full picture around science of reading, we did an entire book study and analyzed it over a full year on the threads of reading and understanding that structure of science of reading and understanding the pillars in depthly so that you can move it in your classroom. You need to fully understand each pillar.
I hope you're not paying off for not taking me for skidooing, Mike.
I always laugh at him because I buy my first class ticket every time on what we actually call scare air. It's first class because you get a window and an aisle seat. It's very small.
Yeah, I think, for a place that has resources for multiple, there are different sites that they have resources for different pillars of literacy instruction. So I think we would need another session for an hour and a half to go through these different places. I personally, and Mike mentioned this earlier, I recommend teachers who are starting this process or just embarking on the science of reading to look at the work and the resources that are available in the Florida Center for Reading Research. It has lots of activities and downloadable PDF files that they can just use in their own class. And they are arranged per grade level, so that makes it even easier for the teachers to use. For phonics, we are very happy that the phonics companion is finally out as a hard copy. So I do highly recommend this because it's based on empirical data we have here in Alberta. We have tested it. It's based on a Canadian context and not from the US. And keep in mind that for comprehension, there isn't anything that is packaged, that comprehension is the product of underlying components. So unless you teach decoding and oral language skills and morphology, it will not come in place. So there is nothing that I would recommend as a packaged program for that aspect.
And really, it doesn't matter what language you're learning in. Teaching reading, like we've learned all our reading from George, who's from Cyprus. English is not even his first language, and reading is reading. It doesn't matter where you're from. The process and the science of it is the same.
That's a really good point. Absolutely. Thank you both. So I'm going to share my screen again, and we are going to give away a copy of the Phonics Companion to a lucky winner who's still on the call. So let me just look at and randomly select. It is going to go to Melissa Williamson. Congratulations, you have won a copy of the Phonics Companion. Please email info@dyslexiacanada.org and we'll get your contact information and I'll get that sent off to you very soon. And I just wanted to end by thanking both of you for joining us tonight and for sharing all of your information. I definitely learned some interesting things, and it was a really interesting conversation for me. I hope it was enjoyable for both of you as well and for our guests. And I wanted to give you both a chance if you wanted to have any sort of closing thoughts or closing words to leave everyone with.
Alicia, I see that Rafaela Profiti has raised her hand, so I don't know if you want to take that.
Just allow her to talk and see what she wants to say. I do know Rafaela.
Oh, she says it's a mistake. Okay, no worries.
Okay, no worries.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Alicia. Thank you to Dyslexia Canada for organizing this session. I am as we said, we have been doing this work for about 15 years in Alberta. We went through the hard times of working with only one school and listening to have one school listen to us, to then one school division, Mike's division, and now we have about 16 school divisions that are listening to what we have to say, and they have reached out for help. And we have now also Alberta Education, the Ministry of Education, that is following the science of reading. They ask for data to make informed decisions. They have mandated screening of all the grade 1 to 3 kids as of September 2022. They have mandated also the provision of evidence-based interventions in the schools, and they ask for data to continue with that direction. So you see that slowly we have started to gain some momentum and get people to listen to what is good practice based on not what George says or what Mike says, but what research says. And I see that some of my colleagues from universities in Ontario and Nova Scotia have been on the call today. I want to thank you for joining us. And I want to thank you for the work you have done with the Ontario Human Rights Commission report. It's very important. Keep up the work you do with the school divisions and the Ministry of Education in your own province. And I want to thank Mike as well for joining us tonight. I know that he's a very busy man, but he gladly accepted to be part of this session. So thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for the invite on my behalf too. Yeah, I'm in a school tonight because our central office caught on fire last week, so that's always fun. So we're in the middle of dealing with all that fun stuff, and it's always great to be part of a good conversation. And really, tomorrow is your first day of changing the lives of kids differently. And I think you have the passion and the desire to change kids and move them. And the science of reading is a huge success to that. And you will just feel so much better of the work you do.
Well, thank you both. And on that, I will say thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. You can find out more information at dyslexiacanada.org, obviously our website. This again was the first of our Spotlight Series webinars. We have another episode scheduled in 2 weeks with a group of educators that worked as a part of the Martin Family Initiative in First Nations schools across Canada. And another episode 2 weeks after that with a school team from Nova Scotia. So we are hoping to bring you stories from right across Canada. And I hope you will continue to join us and share and tell your friends. So thank you, everybody, and have a great night.